So, what is structural violence? Essentially, structural violence occurs when the structure of a country perpetuates inequality and does not allow minorities to succeed within that society. Within the context of the criminal justice system, the structural violence that is the most prominent and that is the most troubling involves race. According to the NAACP, in 2014, African Americans constituted 2.3 million, or 34% of the total correctional population. African Americans are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of white people. The imprisonment rate for African American women is twice that of white women. Nationwide, African American children represent 32% of children who are arrested, 42% of children who are detained, and 52% of children whose cases are judicially waived to criminal court. African Americans and Hispanics make up approximately 32% of the U.S. population, but they make up 56% of all incarcerated people as of 2015. If African Americans and Hispanics were incarcerated at the same rates as white people, prison and jail populations would decline by almost 40%. All of these facts are proof that there is structural violence within our criminal justice system. To be able to understand how we got to the point of making up 5% of the world's population, but having 25% of the world's prisoners, we must look at the history of the United States. One of the easiest ways I have found to look at how our criminal justice system evolved into the monster that it is today is to watch the Netflix documentary The 13th. According to the documentary, we can see that structural violence regarding race within the criminal justice system began after the supposed abolishment of slavery by the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment states that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. This provided a loophole that has been exploited for 1.5 centuries. The country transitioned from slavery to mass incarceration of African American people so that they could be used as slaves once again. Once this became frowned upon, the country transitioned to a country of terror provided by the Ku Klux Klan, and when this became socially unacceptable, the country transitioned to the Jim Crow era. Next, we saw the criminalization of the civil rights movement and its leaders, and eventually the war on drugs and the tough on crime era. The domestic policy chief for President Richard Nixon admitted that we knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. In an audio recording of a conversation between Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, Reagan called African United Nations delegates monkeys. The war on drugs is what catapulted our prison population into astronomical numbers, and the tough on crime era with legislation like 3 strikes you're out and mandatory minimum sentencing, combined with the war on drugs, is what made the United States home to 1/4 of the entire world's prison population. Something that has made the issue even worse is the bail system. Too often, people who cannot make bail are held in prisons for extended periods of time before their trial. Because of this, people are often encouraged to make a plea bargain and admit guilt, even if they are not guilty, because they fear that they will be held in prison for too long before their trials declare them not guilty. One story that has become a symbol of our broken criminal justice system is that of Kalief Browder. When he was 16 years old, he was accused of stealing a backpack, and although he was given the option of a plea bargain, he chose to plead innocent because he did not want to plead guilty for something that he didn't do. He could not make bail, so he was sent to Rikers Island for 3 years. And after 3 years, prosecutors dropped the charges and he was allowed to go home. Tragically, he was unable to cope with life after being imprisoned in solitary confinement for so long, and he committed suicide. This is just one of many stories that are proof of the structural violence within our criminal justice system.